Very good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's Monday, May 9th, 2022. We're going to have a short work session before our regular council meeting. If the clerk would call the roll.
Councilmember Heller.
Here.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Here.
Councilmember Page.
Here. Great, thank you. Chief, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to present for you tonight. If I could have Detective Rumbaugh, his wife Amanda, Lieutenant Stanbaugh, and Lieutenant Patterson step forward. Mayor, will you join them, please? Mr. Mayor, Council, today is an exciting day for the Garden City Police Department. We're here to honor Detective John Brumbaugh, a 25-year police detective with the Garden City Police Department. Today, we want to celebrate an outstanding police officer, detective, and investigator who served the city of Garden City, the great state of Idaho, with dignity and courage for the past 25 years. As most of you know, a career in law enforcement can be extremely challenging, both physically and mentally. Those challenges have been significantly intensified over the last several years. Therefore, successful navigation of a law enforcement career has become even more difficult and should be celebrated when accomplished. Detective Brumbaugh has navigated a challenging law enforcement career with dignity while modeling our organizational service values: safety, excellence, respect, valor, integrity, community, and empathy. Although we're here to recognize Detective Brumbaugh for his service to the city of Garden City and the police department, I'd be remiss not to note that John is an outstanding husband and father. John's accomplishments were not achieved alone. It's an imperative that we recognize John's wife, Amanda, thank you, and his two daughters, Nikki and Tori. A career in law enforcement is often stressful and our schedules vary, making us less reliable. And unfortunately, our reliability falls back on the families. We don't get to tell our jobs or our colleagues that we can't come, but we have to tell our families we're not going to make those dance recitals, those ball games, or their birthdays. Without support of his family, Detective Brumbaugh probably would not have achieved what he's achieved with the Garden City Police Department. They've been an amazing support system, so we thank you for allowing us and loaning us John. Lieutenant Stanbaugh is going to cover Detective Brumbaugh's accomplishments.
All right, so milestones and some information about John. John started with Garden City in April of '97 as a community service officer. In 2001, we hired him as a patrol officer, and during his tenure as patrol officer, he served as a step and motor officer. Detective Brumbaugh was the primary instructor in our traffic education course that we started. He worked very diligently to ensure that program was successful. In 2010, he transferred to the Criminal Investigation Division, where he worked as a general crime investigator, special victim investigator. In 2013, Detective Brumbaugh was assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. During his tenure with the ICAC Task Force, there were numerous child pornography cases resulting in numerous arrests. Detective Brumbaugh's involvement in the task force resulted in many bad individuals being removed from society so they could no longer victimize the innocent. In December of 2020, Detective Brumbaugh transferred back to the Criminal Investigation Unit as a general crimes investigator, where he's currently assigned. His law enforcement career has been marked by several monumental cases. He's a very skilled and thorough investigator and an asset to the police department and to the citizens of Garden City. He has achieved his master's certificate as an officer in April of 16. Going way back to June of 2021, John graduated #1 in his class of post, and he received the Marston Award. He has over 3,500 hours of training in his career. He's been a GPA, Police Officers Association board member in his career. He has worked on mental health for officers since 2010. Worked on a real world stress management for law enforcement. He has numerous letters of commendation. And last but not least, John joined us from Germantown, Pennsylvania. So, back east. Congratulations, sir.
Mr. Mayor and Council, it is with great honor I present Detective John Brava to you for presentation of the Distinguished Police Service Medal. This medal was issued by the National Police Hall of Fame located in Titusville, Florida.
This is the medal, John. Amanda, you wanna put that up? Usually they're not attached. I want to pull it loose. There it is. That's why you're doing. I do. One of John's first rescues in 1997 was the future mayor of Garden City. He was a public service came rescued me from a problem with my car. It was illegal. Well done, John.
Recognize all your accomplishments and that we've gotten you the public something that you do. It's more important that John with the actual award here. So, this is, this is the award certificate.
Mr. Mayor, would it be possible to take a short break so we can take some photos with the council and you?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Council, can you come up?
Time to eat a cheese.
Yes, you do. Business we had on our work session, so we will adjourn the work session and convene the council meeting in a couple of minutes. It's Monday, May 9th, 2022. It's time for the regularly scheduled city council meeting. I ask the clerk to certify a meeting notice.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Heller,
Present.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Here.
Councilmember Page.
Here.
Thank you. If you join me in the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item, changes to the agenda. Seeing none, we will move to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second. Got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of the proclamation, Lisa?
No,
Or I'll find it.
sorry.
No. Give me just a minute. Whereas Larry Gebert supported nonprofits big and small across Boise and the Treasure Valley for 30 years with his live sports and news coverage that resulted in millions of dollars in funding to improve the lives of countless people in need. And whereas Gebert mentored dozens of young producers, reporters, anchors, and photographers throughout his career, helping to shape the next generation of local journalists. And whereas Gebert forecast the weather for decades on KTVB Idaho News Channel 7, providing critical and sometimes life-saving information to Boiseans and Idahoans. And whereas Gebert was a loving husband to his wife Julie, dedicated father to his sons Austin, Michael, and David, and caring father-in-law to his daughters-in-law Nicole and Ashley. And whereas Gebert was also committed to his KTVB family, inviting coworkers over for Christmas morning, lending fatherly advice and wisdom, and doing anything in his power to make people feel like they had a family away from home, especially those who moved to Boise without one. And whereas Gebert not only loved water skiing, but found a way to turn that love into an opportunity to help yet another nonprofit with the Great Polar Bear Challenge, benefiting Make-A-Wish Idaho. Now therefore, I, John G. Evans, Mayor of City of Garden City, do hereby proclaim June 25, 2022 as Larry Gebert Day in the city of Garden City, and I encourage our residents to join together in a day of service to give back to this community like Larry did in ways big and small. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause great seal of the city of Garden City to be affixed at Garden City Hall this 9th day of May in the year 2022. Item 2, under special business, this is an extension request for equipment rental and sales located at 4665 West Chinden. Is there anyone here to address this item? Yes. Yes, come up to the podium, please. Welcome. If you would, give us your name and an address for the record.
There we go. Nicolette Womack from Kimley Horn. We're at 1100 West Idaho Street, Suite 210, Boise, Idaho 83702.
Can you pull that mic around just a little bit closer to you? There we go. Thank you.
Step forward too. We're here tonight representing Equipment Share. We're requesting a conditional use permit extension. The site is at 4665 West Chinden Boulevard. That's at the intersection of 47th and Chinden. Originally in May 2021, the Equipment Share was approved for a conditional use permit. In April of this year, we submitted a parking plan and bond surety documents to planning staff. Also in April, we went before design review for a pre-app meeting. And then tonight we're asking for the conditional use permit extension. We plan to take any and all feedback and go to design review officially in June with final plans. The existing site is shown here. In the original approval, there was a phased approach. In phase one, it was to maintain mostly what is existing there and comply with some specific modifications that staff noted. In phase two, that's when you'll see, and part of phase one was that we needed to comply with specific conditions. So we needed to bond for a lot of that. So we're working through the bonding process with staff. In phase two, it was to actually build a full scale building and do all the site improvements, fencing, sidewalks, landscaping, the whole deal. So that's what we're working through with design review right now. And here, this is what we took before design review last month. We plan to work with staff to fix anything noted from design review and make sure that the final design will comply with standards. And here are the extension findings. And as you saw in our memo, we believe we're in compliance with that. We're hoping to just keep this project on track and make sure that they have some established timelines on complying with all the conditions. So we request approval of the 1-year conditional use permit extension, and we're here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Very good. Thank you. Jenna, do you have anything to add?
Mayor, members of the council, thank you. I think that Ms. Womack gave a great overview, and she did note that there is a bond request in with the city as well as a design review application in with the city. And provided that both of those are approved, that would render and built, that would render this particular application in compliance with the conditions and code. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Any questions of staff?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Thornwell, for your time today. I noticed in the staff report, there were, it sounds like some recurring problems with booms and other kind of lifting apparatus that were perhaps raised above a level that there was an agreement. This seems to be in violation of that. And I just have a concern about that. When we think of partnerships we want in the city, that should be, mutual respect for each other's conditions and rules. What's the status of that?
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Page. There has been our code enforcement, Garden City Code Enforcement has discussed that situation with this applicant and has not revisited that item. Staff has anecdotally noted that at times those booms are raised, but code enforcement has not officially initiated another violation. As I do know that this is not the business owner, Ms. Womack is not the business owner, but a planner that has been hired to usher through the process. I don't know if she would have the ability to further comment on that situation.
Nicolette Womack again, thank you for asking the question. So we do know in the conditional use permit, they're not allowed to be raised. However, the manuals for that equipment and the staff on site hasn't come up to speed with the current requirements. So the manuals for that equipment from the manufacturers require they be raised and stored that way. So we're just working out those details and making sure all the staff understand that on site.
I do have a question then, Ms. Womack. If that's what's required of the equipment, I don't think that's the place for that equipment.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we need to make that very clear to your client.
Perfect. I'll transfer the message. Thank you.
Any other questions? Very good. Just an observation, the equipment that is raised, the forklifts, all-wheel drive forklifts. Last time I drove by, I noticed they have been moved to the south edge of the property up near the south edge of the property. So they're not up on Chinden anymore, where they may have been at some other time. But that's just for, that's for what it's worth, which may not be.
Yeah, I mean,
Jermaine,
Mr.
yeah.
Mayor, if I may, I was unaware of the maintenance rationale for that. So that is helpful, and thank you for that. What my concern is that essentially we have equipment that is a de facto sign and advertising, and we would not allow other signage in Garden City at that height. So I guess the words stand as they are.
Yeah, we'll work through it. Any other questions of our presenters? Okay, what's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the extension for 2020, no, I'm sorry, 2021-0010 for 1 year.
Do I have a second? Second. We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, clerk call roll.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next item F2. This is another extension request for the 34th Street Market. Anna, are you going to address this topic? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Hannah Ball, 215 East 34th Street, Garden City, Idaho. And just wanted to provide a couple small comments. So this is the, this is the start of the 5th year of requesting an extension to continue our 5th year of farmers market and community activities. So just wanted to say thank you. We've appreciated the support of the council and the city and the mayor for the 4 years of markets previously. So we are just requesting an extension. I'm requesting an extension for 3 years, but happy to just continue a year at a time if that's the desire of the council. The farmers market has been a community, family-friendly space for gathering, and that has hosted over 100 community nonprofit events on 34th Street, including the start of the Boise Marathon. So it's a fun place that is really adds a lot of vibrancy to our area and allows for patrons to come to the 34th Street area and explore other businesses and just mingle around the neighborhoods. So I found it to be very beneficial to the tone of the community. And we haven't had any incidents, so I'm hoping we can continue to operate the market. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I have some questions for Ms. Ball.
Okay.
Ms. Ball, could you explain the management of the market? I believe the last time the issue of the market came before the council and Mr. Slavin presented. So what are the relationships? Who's in charge?
Sure. So year one in the farmer's market, we hosted the market kind of individually. So myself and Michael Slavin and some other community individuals started a market. And then by year two, we had interest from Capital City Farmers Market. So then they hosted year 2 and 3. So as it progresses, we'd still like to have some of the same vendor spearheads. So we have a variety of different vendors from the market that wish to run the management on it. And meaning setup, mostly it's just the setup operations.
And again, just for clarity, so the same calendar that Mr. Slavin presented would be applicable for this extension?
It would not be. So we haven't scheduled any community events to date. So we think it's going to be scaled down quite a bit. Previously, we requested, I think last year's operations were starting in April. Now we really want to be consistent doing farmers markets June through October, just to really kind of highlight the season and to really correspond with the First Friday events. So we're trying to get away from the April-May timelines and just go to a June through October timeframe. Also 34th Street, there's some construction happening. So we really want to have a smaller market that, again, complements the First Friday event.
Yeah, yes, Ms. Ball, that was my third question is the concern regarding parking, given as much construction that's happening down there. Is there any concern or new needs to manage the parking situation and parking needs?
From my observation, thank you for that. My observations last year where we still had plenty of spillover parking at that Garden City public parking lot on 36th Street. And that was never full. And so this year I imagine or envision we'll still have spillover there in that parking lot. And again, because we are sizing down or scaling down the market, most of our patrons would still come from bike or on foot. We would still be happy to do all the marketing to say patrons visiting the market shouldn't park at Riverside Hotel and Talaya, the community businesses. But we have found that there's been a couple community businesses around the 34th Street area that have said they can park here because we like the foot traffic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Ms. Ball, just a quick question. So is it a Friday event to tie in with First Friday? So it's a Friday, so it doesn't compete with Boise Market.
That's
That's
correct.
It's Friday evening.
Yep, that's what again, we haven't, it's a smaller. It sounds interesting that we're trying to scale back the market and get it more appropriate to the size of our community, but it's, that actually is the goal. So the goal really is to scale it back and to make a lot more kind of food vendors. And then ultimately, as the Casino Beach Plaza is built out, that food explore and experience a taste of Garden City would then go back into the plaza and be kind of a weekend staple, but that's really kind of exploratory of food and art and kind of the Garden City businesses.
Great, thank you for explaining.
Thank you. Gentlemen on this side, any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ball. I noticed that you mentioned you would prefer a 3-year CUP. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Thank you for that, Councilmember Page. So the market kind of takes a lot of time in the calendar and the schedule. So what I found is it's just a lot of planning that goes into a successful market year. And so having that assurance so that I can already plan in advance next year's seasons of operations, and we're happy to turn that over to staff. But again, I think with just COVID and everything coming up, the Boise Marathon was like, can we host here? And we just need the lag time to really understand what construction projects are going to take place, what the city's vision is and how growth patterns are going to be occurring in that area. So like as of now, it's May and we're planning for a open season of June puts an extreme amount of pressure on a successful planning of the events. And so if I had 6 months in advance to plan for next year's schedule would be extremely beneficial to the area.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Ball, follow-up question, if I may. So is there a nexus between the 3-year request and what you know about the build out of the Casino Beach?
I think that's a perfect question. I would envision the plaza would be constructed next year. But as they're going in for permitting on the C of Os next year, it would be easy if we already had the programming as far as the events completed. So that way we're not doing it in conjunction with everybody's C of O and all the additional files that are going to be coming in due to the Casino Beach completion next year's calendar of events.
Thank you, Ms. Ball. Mr. Mayor, may I have a question for legal counsel, Mr. Wadhams? As a risk manager for the city, Mr. Wadhams, can you weigh in on I guess what your preference would be for timelines on a CUP of this nature?
Mayor, Council President Page, I don't really have a legal recommendation along those lines. I think there's some discretion in the code. And I can't remember, maybe Ms. Thornborough has it. What does it allow for 3-year extensions? Or I thought it was only 365 at a time, but I could be mistaken on that. I know some things, some extension requests, Council President, are for a year by code. Some of them are 180 days by code, and I'm not sure what the code says about conditional use permits. But if it's assuming it's allowed by code, and it looks like we're going to find out here in a minute, I don't have any like legal preferences as a risk manager. I think having them come back every year, there probably would be some advantages to that, but I don't think they're huge advantages.
Well, what's the demand on staff time when we're coming back annually?
Mayor, Council President is just writing a staff report and putting together the findings of fact and conclusions a lot. I don't think it's a huge load, but certainly it is a load. I would imagine a couple hours to put the packet together.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. And Mr. Mayor, while Jenna's doing that, can I shoot another question?
Absolutely.
To Chief Allen, are there any compliance complications that you're aware of that are not reflected here in the staff report?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, let the record reflect that the chief indicated there were no issues.
Mayor, Councilmember Page, I have pulled up the code. I have not shared it to those online, however, but 86A8 B, the first line, and B notes not more than 365 days for extension.
Thank you for your time.
Mayor, Council President, that is the answer. I think those are the confines that are in the code.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
Look at it every year.
may I direct a question? to
Sure.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Then could we add that to our growing list of code evaluation?
Yes,
as we
of
go
course.
through?
You think perhaps you want to look and see if that should be extended beyond 365 days?
I do believe that there are likely more than just this situation that would benefit from more than a 365-day extension.
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, that is on the list. No.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
okay. Any other questions of Ms. Ball? Okay, great, thank you. What's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I find that good cause exists to support this request, that there has not been change in the neighborhood at this point that would affect the compatibility of this project. And with that, I would move that we grant 1-year extension to CUP 2021-0007.
Second. A motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes. Thank you. Motion carries. Looks like we'll be taking a look at that extension constraint in the code revisions too, so. Okay, we'll move on now to special business item 4. And this is our 6-month financial review. It's on page 65 in the packet. Now, when you're ready, Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'll just kind of go over my memo a little bit. At this point, 6 months into the year, you won't see a lot of variation on the year-end projections. We're still kind of seeing where things will fall out. We do know, however, a few things. We do see that all of our revenues are tracking where they should be, in some cases, maybe just a little bit higher. The library, I did note that you'll see a reduction in one of their revenues. Their particular ARPA funding that they received, they were unable to sustain the social worker position, and therefore we had to return about $14,000 of those funds, a corresponding reduction in expenses. So that's a zero effect to the bottom line. We are noticing that the capital revenues for the water and sewer fund are running a little bit lower. Those are solely driven by not only the development, but the timing of when a permit is pulled and a connection is made. So those are just off a little bit from the budget. We'll continue to monitor those. From an expense standpoint, we did note that our medical and dental expenses, we would project a budget increase because in our old program, we wouldn't know the increase from Blue Cross until well after we'd started the fiscal year. With our new program with AAA, we will have the benefit of knowing that increase next month. So we'll be able to build an actual in rather than a forecast. But we were fortunate that the medical and dental, the increases were both less than what we had budgeted. So we'll see some savings there. Our building maintenance fund for City Hall, we are having to do some unplanned maintenance work on our security system. So we're going to be a little bit over on that one line item. This will be a one-time expense. And then as Colin has kind of noted, and we've been talking about our parks and facilities, from a personnel standpoint, we will be under budget because we are down a person as we had budgeted for 3 people. Moving forward, we have picked up the native landscaping to handle some of the lawn mowing. We do have that position in next year's budget, and hopefully we could get that filled. We did try 1 round of interviews, and unfortunately we were unsuccessful there, hoping things will maybe soften a little bit. And then credit card fees, we're noticing a little uptick in that, not because the percentage is going up, but because the usage is going up. We've had some large developer fees come through where they have used a credit card, and that hits our fees a little higher than usual. You know, we anticipate a normal, but we've seen some very large, double-digit tens of thousands come through on a credit card, and they have the discretion to do that. So a little uptick there. I don't expect that to be a normal. It's usually maybe once a year we might see that. So, all in all, everything's trending very well. So if you have any specific questions about a line item or a department, myself or any of the department heads would be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
And thank you, Ms. Lyman. With that, I'm interested in the fee piece for cards. Has the city, or can the city consider, a 3% adjustment when someone chooses to pay in that manner?
And I've been looking into that a little bit, asking some of the other jurisdictions what they do. You do have to be a little careful because there are some very specific laws within the banking industry on passing those fees along. So I've started looking into that, and I'll have a better answer for you next time. But I have been sending out some feelers and asking some questions. But yeah.
So let me have a question too.
Okay, go ahead.
Ada County charges us
credit for card fees. So it'd be interesting to see.
Right, yeah, I think what I'm looking at, is it something we have to do for everyone, or can we segregate out only these fees, get the extra bump? You know, would we be doing that to all of our utility customers as well? Because we do get a large share of our utility payments by credit card.
The other question I had is just inflationary pressures. So obviously, cost of fuel, cost of just about everything. Is that, you mentioned, unplanned expenses and things like that, nothing really related to inflation. Is that forecasted, or is there any discussion about how that'll impact the budget?
There is, Councilmember Jacobs. We are looking at, of course, the 23 budget. And now that we've had a couple of months under our belt of this higher gas pricing, we will see, specifically in the police department, of course, we'll see an increase in that line item. I was just today trending some of the other departments, and because they have a smaller fleet and less driving, we're not going to see quite the impact, but we are definitely trending that out. Looking more at April's charges rather than what we did from October to April.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
following up on that conversation, as the economy continues to shift, how will the city react to wage increase demands? Demands may be a strong word, but I'm certainly seeing requests for higher wages, even at entry level positions. And in my mind, I'm specifically thinking of Parks and Rec and the library. How do we keep up with pay scale increase needs?
well, we're working on that, and I'm reasonably optimistic that we're going to be able to do significantly more than we've historically done on a percentage basis. It's the inflation that we've seen has some mediating effects as well to some degree. So with the cost increases we're all realizing, there's a significant increase in the sales tax that's collected by the state, and the distribution of that through the distribution formula back to the cities. We're seeing an significant increase in the sales tax revenue portion in our revenue lines. So, Lisa and I were just together earlier today going through the numbers. I don't want to get specific right now until after we have we're in a position to have a regular budget workshop. But you're not going to see a 3% increase come from us. It's going to be significantly more than that. And that's recognizing that things have changed. But there is significant upward pressure. Lisa is gathering information on what other cities are doing as that becomes available. There's a lot of holding things close to the vest, so to speak, right now, because anything you say from the Diaz here is going to be received as an expectation of an action. So that's why I'm not getting any more specific, but we do recognize that under the current circumstances, our historic increases in the revenue line would result in a net decrease in buying power by a significant amount to our employees. So we're committed to doing everything we can to manage around that. And the council has actually already helped us in that endeavor by allowing us to buy police cars with ARPA money to help us bridge this first year and perhaps next year as well. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, great, thank you. Next item, item 4. This is a continuation of discussion regarding the overlay district. Before we get into our discussion, I just asked Charlie and Jenna to to just kind of frame this a little bit, we're not asking you really for an action of any kind tonight, but we want to make sure we're communicating to those that are interested in this topic the lens that we're looking through as we look at this. And it's certainly not to diminish the legacy of Cyril Mitchell or the benefits we've seen from the identity of that district down there. So, but we do have some changes that we're going to have to make as a result of litigation. So with that, when you're ready, Mr. Wadhams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just turn it over to Ms. Thornborough. She, I think, is going to give a brief update about what happened at the last design review committee
Okay.
meeting. Design review, just for the council's knowledge. These code amendments are going to have to be taken through design review committee and planning and zoning commission. So it's going to be in front of planning and zoning commission next week. It's going to be on your agenda for the 23rd of this month. And I think Ms. Thornborough is going to just update the council on what happened in front of design review.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. When this went to design review last Monday, through discussion, there was not a formal recommendation made. It did sound like they understood the need to address the judgment order and move that component forward, but they also expressed some desire to look further at some of the difficulties within code. They specified the parking, as we all know, is out there as a need. And the plan unit development code and what's triggering applications to be heard as plan unit development. And also they expressed a desire to fix the live work create district, but make it a usable and required tool to implement the comprehensive plans vision for that neighborhood, rather than right now it is a overlay district that can be used on the discretion of the applicant. And so they had suggested convening a committee to really dive deep into some of a larger range beyond that, which is found within the judgment order. And because they do not have a formal recommendation at this point in time, I suspect that there may be a situation where either there isn't a formal recommendation in 2 weeks, or the council could continue the review of the code out another couple of weeks for that recommendation. And with that, I stand for questions.
Hey, that's kind of where we are. Any questions? One thing regarding a committee, I haven't got my arms wrapped around, frankly, the protocol that we have with code of change that goes through required design review, planning and zoning, and then to the council. And I'm not sure how a committee would interface with that and keep us on track with our protocol. So I just need a little more time to kind of ferret that out with Jenna and Charlie, see if that's a recommendation that can come forward. But certainly, I think there's some ideas that are developing that we look forward to having a discussion, particularly in the areas that go beyond Judge Minima's admonition in his decision. There are some criteria in the current code that we aren't going to be utilizing until we get this sorted out. But taking a look at other things, I think we're all starting to get correspondence regarding parking. I've had correspondence both ways. So we got a little ways to go on this. So it's in the pipeline, however.
Mr. Mayor, I do have one question just for clarification from you, Jenna. So, because I'm a little confused on this. So we're talking about parking, and then we're also talking about the overlay in this real district. And then, so is the parking, are we talking about, is that code for citywide parking or just for that overlay?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, what I understand, I believe I'm hearing is citywide parking. I believe that Mr. Wadums has already also brought that up. He brought that up within the memorandum that's addressing this. If there is a repeal of the overlay, that it would become just the base zoning district, which would then utilize the parking that's within code for all of the city. And that's where it has come up. It's within the memorandum. And I am hearing with this council and with your appointed bodies, as well as through all of the hearings, that parking is something that it comes up quite often, as everybody in this room knows. And what I believe that I heard the design review was saying, address this now, because it's an issue that we're dealing with in every meeting, and make the live work create district something that would be a utilizable code, where it's only been used just a handful, or not even a handful, just a couple of times at this point.
So when we're thinking about parking, think about it from citywide code versus just real. The correspondence I've got is they kind of tie the two together, but really the parking is the broader, is a broader issue than the two separate.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, that's exactly what I think that I'm hearing them say is address the big issues that keep coming up that are creating some of the disjointed reviews of projects.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Okay. Let's move down to ordinances, resolution, contracts. These are action items. G1, resolution 1122-22. This is in regard to small wireless facilities design standards. Everybody's favorite topic, I think, at this point. Councilmember Heller.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Give Mr. Wadums a moment to get caught
Wait a
up.
minute, set to share my screen, please.
While he's getting that set up, I just wanted to let the council know there are some, what I view as de minimis tweaks that need to be made to this. We're going to briefly take a look at a couple of those between Charlie and Jenna. And my ask is going to be that you consider this resolution subject to making those tweaks internally between Charlie and Jenna. Certainly a final can be sent out. And it certainly could be readdressed if you didn't agree with the de minimis nature that I'm representing to you tonight. But we have an application that we're expecting from AT&T. It's going to start the shot clock, and I think there's some level of urgency to get this, keep this moving. So you're certainly at liberty to disagree with what I just told you after what we hear here in a few minutes, but I just thought I'd frame that as a context as you're listening. So, Mr. Wadums.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My memorandum starts on page 80 of your packet. What I have put on the screen as a share screen is page 117 of your packet. And so we're here to talk about design standards for 5G or small wireless facilities. So what's on the screen, on the share screen, is what we have for proposed 3 different types of designs And just to recap, we have right here, we have type 1. These are your utility pole attachments. Type 2, these are the new freestanding installations. And then we have type 3 street light replacements. These would be the 3 types of small cell wireless facilities that staff is recommending that we should regulate in terms of design standards. And these are the design standards that we're recommending for the city. And I'm going to get into some detail, but I'm trying not to get into the technical things. So this is what we are proposing. I know the industry is here both in person. Verizon's here. If anybody has questions for Verizon, I think AT&T and maybe Crown Castle is on Zoom as well. But my understanding from the industry and working with the committees is that this is basically the 3 different types of build out. When you get to type 3 right here, then there are some different options.
Let's see.
How do you do the bat line?
You like that? See? Thanks to the generous budget that the council gives you, legal department, we can get pointers like this. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so this is it. And, and I'm going to start, this is my funnel approach. I'm going to start with the low hanging fruit, and I'm going to get down to there are a couple issues that have yet to be decided. And so I'm going to start with what I think we're all on the same page as on. And one of them is these designs. I think this is what the industry can do. I think this is what they're putting in Meridian and Boise right now, and maybe unincorporated Ada County. But this is what the industry can do in this market. I've understood that different markets, like on the eastern side of the country, eastern or mid part of the country, it may be different. But for this part of the country, this is just what they are able to put in. These are written, so you'll see, and I will say that there's a lot of technical stuff in these design standards that I really don't understand as a lawyer. I'm sure the industry understands a lot of it, and I know the planners understand all of it, but the purpose or the intent behind this is just for whoever's reviewing these for the city to just look at the pictures. And so what we have right here, this is now, what page? 122 of your packet. This is what we're not going to allow. So whoever's reviewing this hopefully doesn't have to look at all the technical specs. We're hoping that the planner does not have to get in the technical specs. The planner can just look at the pictures. And if it looks like this, it's not going to get approved. If it looks like this, it's not going to get approved. But if it looks like that first page I showed you, that'll probably be an approval. And if it looks like any of these pictures, the planner can just look at it and say, hey, I don't know what these technical specs are, but I know that their application looks like this. So if it looks like this, we're hoping with the council's permission that the planner can just stamp it and we can move it along, because there is the shot clock that we've all mentioned before. The planner does not have a lot of time to look at these things. So we're hoping that while we put all these technical specifications in here, that the planner's not looking at that, they're just looking at the pictures. And so that's the intent, is just look at the pictures to see if it's gonna pass or whether it's not gonna pass. And again, that gets back to the objective criteria. We're trying really hard to have objective criteria on everything. And this is one where it's pretty objective. Look at the picture. If it looks like the picture, you get approved. There are some things like I mentioned here. So I just want to go up to page now 116 of your packet and explain this to you. There's a couple, like I said, couple undecided things. I was hoping it was all going to be ready to go for tonight, but I'd say we're 95% there, but there are still a couple things that the development services and the department and the industry are going to have to figure out. So I'm just going to go through this real quick. On this first page right here, you'll see there's some highlighted portions, and there's some stuff I want to draw your attention to, please. So on this very first paragraph right here, it says a couple things. One of the things that we keep going back and forth on is it says up there, deviations from this guideline shall be approved on a case-by-case basis by the City of Garden City planning official or designee prior to installation. So what that says is these are the standards, but there could be variances or there could be waivers in the planning official's discretion. Some of the other things it talks about is whether that they can ask, and we call these things a relief valve or some kind of a waiver or variance if what we're asking are not reasonably feasible. So we've talked about. I think that's it. Reasonable. Somewhere in here we talk about reasonably feasible. And so if what these standards are not reasonably feasible to a particular applicant, they can ask for a waiver or a variance. That's the way it's currently written. So I would say some pending issues that I would turn it over to either Ms. Thornborough or Mayor and Council, should Mayor and Council want to chime in, is the order of preference. We've gone back and forth on order of preference, and the way it's currently written, my understanding is it may need to be tweaked. Up here it talks about, let me get my reference here. It talks about the order of preference is first to install and in-stand antennas, then to co-locate on existing poles, and then to install a new freestanding pole type 2. And then, so this is the preference that's in here. I understand that's not really, that might not be the city's preference. And so if the mayor or the council want to chime in on what the preference should be, I think now would be a great opportunity to do that. If the mayor and council don't care about really the preference, you could just defer and let your staff come up with that preference. That would be within the council's discretion, but that is an outstanding issue. I think the industry will tell you, and I think they'll tell you tonight, that these are all for right of way. They want to install these in right of way, and their preference is to first put them on pre-existing infrastructure generally. But they also want the ability to put in freestanding poles. So should the council, as a policy matter, have a preference on what goes in first, I think that would be up to mayor and council, or you could delegate that to Ms. Thornborough. Another thing that you'll see in here, and let me explain what's highlighted in yellow. So these right here, these guidelines, all right here are what your staff recommended, okay? And then what's in yellow is what the industry said when I met with them Friday. So I was hoping we were going to have a kumbaya and everything, and we had a kumbaya on almost everything, but the industry did have some comments, and that's what's in the yellow. So you'll see right here that there's the yellow are from the industry. Then there's some strike throughs and underlines. And so what's stricken through is what the industry is recommending, and what's underlined on this page right here is what the industry is suggesting, and the strike throughs is also what the industry is recommending. You've heard a lot about a sweet spot in terms of height. So if the mayor or the council want to decide here what the heights should be, I think this would be a good time to do it. As you'll recall, right now we have these design standards set up in 3 different areas. Arterial streets have one standard, collector streets have another standard, and local streets have another standard. So we know that anything over 50 feet, that is not a small cell facility. So all these are going to be no taller than 50 feet under the FCC regs. These are all going to be under 50 feet. We know there's a sweet spot somewhere for them to be the most productive. That's somewhere between 25 and 40 feet. And so what we've tried to do is find the sweet spot. And there's 2 different versions in these design regs. Right here, and then we get it is number 1 right here. That's what number 1 right here says on page 116 of your packet, is that on arterial streets, these should not be any taller than 50 feet. That's a given. On collector streets, they should not be taller than 30 feet. And then in your neighborhoods or your local streets, they should not be more than 20 feet. That's what this says. But then if you go to page 121 of the packet, it says 45 feet for arterial, 35 feet for collector, and 30 feet for local. So they're close, but if the council has a preference, staff would love to hear it tonight. Staff's recommending for arterial either 45 or 50 feet, for collector either 30 or 35 feet, and for local either 20 or 30 feet. You will see right here, my reference on this one, it says 50 feet for that area, 30 feet for arterial, and then it says 25 for local roadways. That's underlined, and I just wanted to point that out because staff initially had 20 feet in there, as so in your neighborhoods they can't be taller than 20 feet. What the industry will tell you is that's too low. So the industry is recommending that in your neighborhoods that they be able to go up to 25 feet, and so that's again a policy decision for the city. Another decision for somebody to make is what color should they be. It's in one part it says that for type 2 and type 3 poles they should be black, and another part it says for type 2 and type 3 poles it should be colored to match the surrounding area. Again, if the mayor council has a preference on that, staff would love to hear it tonight. So those are the highlights as I saw them.
the technical stuff is scary when you first look at it. I don't understand a lot of the technical stuff, but we're trying to make it so it's not scary for the planner. Just look at the pictures and make sure it's not taller than our maximum heights. So with that, I stand for questions. I think this is really close. I think the council has a couple different options. You could continue this matter again for another 2 weeks so we can get all these things ferreted out, or you could just trust your staff to take care of it and delegate that. So you could move to continue, you can move to pass the resolution after a final review by legal and your planning department, or I'm sure there's other options as well. One thing I do want to point out before I sit down or stand for questions is the actual resolution is on page 115 of your packet. I'll get there because I do think there's some credit due, or a lot of people have worked hard on this, and I want to acknowledge that. And I did that in the proposed resolution. So in the proposed resolution, you can see on section 1, the city acknowledges that the design review committee made recommendations on this way back, almost a year ago, July 19th, 2021. And the Parks and Waterways Committee worked hard on this too, as well. And they made recommendations on July 27th of 2021. So I thought to acknowledge their work, I would put that right in the resolution. And I did that as a recommendation. So that's where we are. And at this point in time, I'll stand for questions. And I think Ms. Thornborough has some comments as well. Thank you.
Jenna, why don't you come up and let's hear from you, and then we'll ask questions after we hear from both of them.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and Mr. Wadhams. I agree with Mr. Wadhams. I think this is very close. There are a few items that are still outstanding. As he mentioned, he was still working on this with the industry as late as Friday. And so from my point of view, I think that there could be some clarity. As he had noted, there's a lot of words in there that we may not know what they mean, maybe perhaps defining them or removing them. If we could, well, we make it as simple as possible, should you choose to go that direction, either through a continuance or deferring to a staff changes. Another is, as this was going through on Friday afternoon, some of the requested changes from the industry actually result in a little bit of a divergence, not a little bit, in divergence with Garden City Code. And so just massaging those so that they can match Garden City Code or defer to Garden City Code perhaps. And then the pictures, I think it is a great idea to have the pictures illustrate what's something that can be approved or not. And there might be just 1 or 2 pictures that I might recommend relocating or amending. For example, this particular picture shows an equipment shroud on the outside of the pole, and both the design review committee as well as the Parks and Waterways committee had recommended that the equipment be internal to the pole. And then it does note that deviations can be made with showing that there's good cause, but from the department that will be implementing this, we suggest that there might be criteria and acceptable waivers that staff could allow. And finally, as it had been noted by Mr. Wadhams, which of the tiering would be most acceptable. Just as a reminder, it is in your packet from the memorandum from, it sounds like about a year ago now, that both the design review committee as well as the Parks and Waterways committee did prefer to see the utilization of streetlights first, and then existing poles, and then lastly, the third tier would be standalone poles. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Mr. Thornborough. Okay, go ahead and I'll open it up for questions. Councilmember Jacobs.
I just had a couple of questions. I had the opportunity to get on a call with Crown Castle last week and just educate myself a little bit about this, because at the last meeting it was kind of new to me and I had some questions. So one of the things that they brought up, since they're the infrastructure provider for this, is that ideally they would like multiple carriers on one pole. economically, it just makes better sense for them, and they actually have a couple carriers that would prefer to co-locate because it's less expensive. So my only question is do these designs take into account, can you have multiple carriers? Does the design stay the same, I guess, if we have more than one carrier in the pole? And two, does it stay the same height, or does multiple carriers in a single pole mean more height? And do we have to allow for that in the code and in the design and what Charlie's doing? Do we, if co-located, it's this, I guess that's my question.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, with that, I do know that Crown Castle has a slightly different desire in the co-location. And I believe that these must allow for that if they've made it this far into the design standards, and Mr. Wadhams is shaking his head yes for the record. So we believe that these do allow for those.
I didn't see it specifically spelled out, so those guys. And then I guess my only feedback on the color is, I think in the neighborhoods, if residential, they use kind of the traditional light pole, similar to what Boise has, that are green. And so I'd assume that probably in those neighborhoods, we'd keep that color, and then anywhere else, black. My 2 cents.
Okay, other questions?
May I offer a comment?
Absolutely.
Mayor and Janet, I want to thank you and Colin and Charlie and Compass, Crown Compass for all the time you've spent answering my questions and reassuring me that staff has sufficient authority in the implementation of this program to work on behalf of the city and its appearance, its interests. So just to thank you for the time spent helping me with that.
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, on behalf of all the staff, thank you.
Other questions of Jenna or Charlie before I open it up for some public comment?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
And Ms. Thornborough, please, can you tell me on the back to this co-location, seems to be the word of the day here. Once a facility has been erected, is it then too late to co-locate, or can the co-location be retro? So, one industry provider erects the facility, and then a second provider in the industry comes in. Is that location now ineligible, or is it temporarily pulled down to co-locate? Do you know that answer?
Mayor, Councilmember Page, unfortunately, I do not know that answer. I do know that we have in person a member of the industry, as well as some individuals online that might be able to answer that. And I will defer to Mr. Wadhams if the master license agreement would facilitate that. But my hunch is, as long as the equipment will facilitate that, that the master license agreement would on the city side.
I think one of the operative questions is whether we could require that, because we've heard other members of the industry say that the co-location doesn't work. So unless I'm remembering wrong, am I remembering wrong, Jason? Okay, I'm not remembering wrong. So there's some different perspectives there. And I think one caution is we start slipping into the technical components of this 5G, and the FCC has given us some limited authority to do what we're attempting to do tonight. But as far as how the equipment functions or what hardware it needs to function, I think we're on a slippery slope if we want to try to get into that particular topic. And I think that can apply to the height. Makes me a little nervous for us to say, well, in the neighborhoods, it's going to be this height. And then, we've got maximum heights for are, for the arterials, which is 50 feet. One neighborhood to have fewer poles. They may need to be 35 feet high, and another neighborhood, they may not need to be that high, just depending on all kinds of things that, again, get into the technical realm. So the fact that there are waiver components in the language really indicate that we're asking our staff to make potentially a very technical decision on an industry that we are required to allow in, but have no real internal expertise to understand how that all works. I've been approached by people that have concerns regarding health risks that they believe might be associated. That's not under our purview at all. But those individuals would be most happy with the taller facilities. Others might have a position on clutter. If we aren't co-locating and we have 3 providers in one of our larger neighborhoods, and the poles have to be a certain distance apart, we're going to have a lot of them. And that's just kind of be the way it is. So I think if we have them where they are the same, look the same or consistent, but it makes me nervous when we're just assigning arbitrary, well, I think 20 is high enough, or I think 25 is high enough, or I mean, we're really inviting a technical waiver request that's embedded in this. So that's why we can certainly try to grasp all of this stuff and make a technical decision. But I think the negotiations are very close, and we find out what really is going to work best in the language to meet the technical aspects. And and we can supply the pictures. And we have one of the only recommendations really is that we have, unless it's technically impossible, that we have the hardware enclosed and instead of hanging out on the side of the pole. But I don't know if that's always the case. So that's my caution. That's what, when we're sitting there, we sat for an hour today, kind of pounding through some of this stuff to present tonight, and trying to fit something into our code that our code was never really designed to deal with, frankly, and that we're preempted from doing very much about. The cities of Boise and Meridian have no design standard. There's facilities in both those cities now, and one idea is just to be consistent with that. So that's why I'm hoping we can have some latitude internally to kind of navigate this the best we can, because there's not the degree of control that we might think we have. So that's my comment.
Mr. Mayor, one more comment. If people are interested in seeing one, I didn't know where there was one. And so when I was on the call, there is one, I guess, on 8th and Bannock, right by the post office downtown. So if you're downtown and you want to see what they look like, I haven't gone down there and seen it yet. So,
Very good.
but there is an example for anybody who wants to go check one out.
Sure. It's, there's some argument for having some consistency. It's so let's leave it there for just a minute. Let me see if we have anyone online that would like to comment. I added in the agenda that those members of the public would be welcome to comment. I didn't know how many we'd have. I'm asking folks to keep their comments to 3 minutes. First of all, if you are joining us remotely, if you would raise your hand indicating you want to comment. And for now, let's have the non-technical folks, the non-industry folks, just see if we have any general public folks that have a comment to make. I'm getting better. I didn't call on the cursor this time. Okay, I don't see any hands raised for public comment. I think we'll start. Jason, you're here. Would you come up for any questions, please? And those in the industry that are on the call, I will give you an opportunity if you happen to disagree with what we're about to hear. Let's first of all, I made a characterization that I think is correct, but it may not be. So would you correct me if I made an error in what I just, my comment here just a few minutes ago?
Yeah, sorry, so.
And give us your name and address.
Yeah, Jason Rodusco, Verizon Wireless, 12877 West McMillan Road, Boise, Idaho. And thank you, Mayor. Thank you, members of the council. It's good to see you guys again. I think in regards to I think that seems the main kind of question is the co-location question. Having worked for a wireless infrastructure company in the past and now working for the actual carrier, not saying they can't be co-located, but the preference is in being, like I said, a previous right-of-way agent for the state and federal government. Obviously less clutter in the right-of-way is best. However, small cells are governed or dictated by the FCC, the 2018 FCC order. And that gives very specific heights and sizes. And small wireless facilities consist of 4G small cells, 4G, 5G combination small cells, and just 5G small cells. And so with many of our, say with Verizon Wireless's small cells in the Treasure Valley area, we are doing 4G, 5G combo small cells. So it takes up those FCC designations or those requirements. So it uses pretty much all the capacity we can use to be a small cell. So obviously, if we want to, which I haven't seen this is dictate a small cell by each carrier. Well, if you start adding those up, and then you start getting to some pretty large, small wireless facilities. And so the preference of the carriers is to not have co-location, where applicable, right? And so let me stop there. Any questions regarding that?
So I just had a question, Justin, because my understanding, it kind of contradicts what Crown Council is saying. Is their preference is to co-locate, but the carrier's preference is not probably. It's competitive, the market, things like that. So it seems like, from what I've heard from them and you, it's like.
So yeah, thank you, Councilman, Mayor and Councilman. Obviously, a wireless infrastructure company is different than the carrier, right? And so the infrastructure companies, obviously their preference would be to pack as many into an area as possible. And so I think as long as the city doesn't require the carriers to co-locate, which goes against the federal guidelines or the federal order. So as long as that's not in there, I think we're okay.
So those that want to do and those that don't.
Yeah.
And my understanding then is basically co-locating with yourself on a single pole because 4G and 5G on the same unit. Is that the way to? I understood that. You said you could have one antenna that have both technologies.
You would have separate antennas for the different spectrum licenses. So a 4G would have, typically that antenna on top, and the 5G will be the 3 panel antennas.
But on the same unit. Or separate.
They can be on the same pole. They will be separate equipment.
on the, so I guess you'd have them on the same pole.
Yeah, you have them on the same pole. So yeah, so a lot of, and I can show you a picture here. I have on my cell phone, but we have a standalone pole that actually is very similar to the photos that I've shown. Yeah, so it's, the equipment's at the bottom, and then the pole top is you see the antennas, and then on top of that is the 4G CAN antenna, we usually call it. So now if you start thinking of like, if you start co-locating, and then if we start putting height restrictions, now well, typically it's about 6 to 9 feet, depending on the design. So if we're putting a 4G, 5G combo on top of a pole, now it's likely you'll need 6 to 9 feet for the next carrier. Now you're starting to get from like, you went from 25 feet to 31 to 35, right? And so that's where like the co-location becomes an issue, and it opens up more, essentially more issues that I don't think the city really wants to deal with, especially because there are so many poles in the right of way existing, right? And yes, as Mr. Wadham said, the preference is to attach to existing infrastructure in the right of way.
So, okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we've got Jason up here. Any other of those types of questions? Can you respond to on local streets, is the same standard height? I mean, does it vary for technical reasons? What might be optimal?
That's hard to say because it depends on the network itself, right? So
That's what I thought you'd say.
Yeah, the radio frequency engineers, they look at the network and they'll pick locations to where the small cells will propagate properly.
Mhm.
And so depending on what's what's on that block, what's in that area, trees, things like that, we may need more or less. Heights will vary, right? And so that's why I said the sweet spot kind of is at 25 to 45 heights, but those can vary, and as long as I think Mr. Adams has and the rest of the staff have been phenomenal to work with. They've done a great job in building out that relief valve, just so we can work with the staff and just getting the right heights, the right locations at the right heights. So
thank you. That was the answer I expected. I saw the comment with the relief valve. Thank you for correcting me on the term. I couldn't remember. There's a technical component that is going to drive a lot of what makes sense wherever these things are, whether they're wherever they are. So
yeah. Well, and I will say, just add to that, Mr. Mayor, is obviously there's a lot of investment in this, and we don't want to put more in than what we need to, right? So please understand that it's just like, building development. We're not going to, developers aren't going to go build roads to places that they don't need them, right? It's on an as needed basis. And as we continue to, as things move further and further into the 21st century, we're using more and more data than ever before. And not, like I said, not just for smartphones, but it's also for smart homes, smart cars, smart cities, right? And so we're kind of building the pipeline for that as well.
okay, good.
Mr.
Yes.
I believe somebody has their hand up.
Okay, very good. Jason, I'll keep you on standby here for a minute.
Stand by.
Yes, you want to recognize Kathy Put? Do you see her? There we go.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For the record, my name is Kathy Putt. I do government affairs for Crown Castle. My address is 1505 Westlake Avenue North in Seattle, Washington. I just wanted to take a short moment to thank you all for your consideration of these standards. And I really wanted to give a big hand of thanks and applause to your staff who have done a knockout job going through many comments from many different providers over and over and over again. They've been really receptive. They've been just really good to work with. So thank you so much for your team and their involvement and working cooperatively with all the different players. As you've heard, Crown Castle does have a slightly different business model than the carriers. We are not a content provider or a carrier. We just build the infrastructure and then we lease it up to the carriers or anyone else who has a need for connectivity. We are planning to do a project for Verizon. And many of you have heard, and we always say we encourage co-location whenever possible, recognizing that it may not always be possible depending on the equipment that's being used. But I would say, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that we do advocate for co-location whenever possible. We never say that it should be mandated, just encouraged where feasible. And I didn't catch the name, but one of you asked if co-location could be done after the pole was initially installed. If I got that correctly. And I just wanted to let you know that co-location, that we typically do add a second carrier where possible after the pole and the first carrier are already in place. As I've mentioned to some of you before, once the fiber and power are in place to serve a particular pole, it just makes sense to use that fiber and that power to serve another carrier if possible. So nothing happens when we add a second or third carrier other than we're adding additional equipment to that pole. And I guess with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you again so much for your attention to these really technical and challenging issues. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think your testimony adds some credence to the being careful about arbitrary height decisions, because if you can locate, it's going to get taller. Okay, I got a head nod, so I got that one right. That's my technical expertise. So, is there anyone else joining us remotely that has something to say? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, before you go into deliberations, may I ask for a point of order?
Yes, you may.
Okay, there's just a couple of things I think I neglected, and I just want to remind the council. There's also a type 4, but we took that out. I think the council's direction was that you did not want to regulate the type 4, and that's 5G or 4G that's on traffic control devices. I think the council decided to let ACHD regulate that. So, but for the record, I just wanted to remind the council that that's why it's not on the design standards, is because I think the council just wanted ACHD to regulate type 4. The other thing is some people have made comments about talking to their constituents or the industry. I just want to, for the record, say that I think that's appropriate in this case. This is not a quasi-judicial application. So I've advised, as long as we make a record of it, you can talk to your constituents or the industry, because this is not quasi-judicial. This is legislative or possibly administrative. Definitely not quasi-judicial. And the last thing I wanted to mention, people have talked about how some of our neighboring jurisdictions are kind of going through this process right now. Well, some of our neighboring jurisdictions are waiting to see what we do, and then they're going to piggyback on. So, so there's quite a few sets of eyes watching us right now. Thank you.
Well, sometimes it's hard to be the standard bearer. Okay, I think to move this along, we do have a resolution before you. We have a recommendation from staff perspective before you. The council has a lot of latitude in how you choose to proceed. We can continue this item and continue this discussion. We can answer in a future draft some specific questions if they weren't answered tonight. I think the significant issues regarding height and the mass of the pole, there are some FCC constraints on that now. We have a what was the word you used again for waiver? Relief valve. Thank you. I'm going to write it down. We do have a relief valve in the provisions, which to me kind of defeats the purpose of having height restrictions. I don't know, because if the engineering doesn't work, then then they're going to come in and say, we can't make it work at whatever height we arbitrarily assigned to it. But that's something you can discuss. I think that the teams are going to design what works, and that's probably what we're going to end up with, regardless of what we say. Color black or blend with the surrounding area. I don't know what blending with the surrounding area means, but I think we need to deal with that. And the co-locate issue, I think we all have an understanding that we can't mandate that, but that's certainly an option, particularly if Castle's doing improvements. And we have recommendations from our Parks Committee and Design Review that we've looked at. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion. We'll start with you as the council president, Councilmember Page, and if you can help us get a mind where you think we ought to go with this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is my preference to act on this resolution sooner than later. Furthermore, it goes without saying that we lack the technical expertise to guide that conversation. We would be, I think, doing so incorrectly. With regard to the language of the resolution itself or the draft resolution, Mr. Wadhams, I would like to see, after the bold text of the title of the resolution, where you enumerate sections 1, 2, 3, 4 down to 5. I'd like to see those re-indexed with section 1 having language stating to the effect, whereas on September 27th, 2018, before the Federal Communications Commission, Commissioners O'Reilly and Carr issued this statement, essentially showing in our resolution that we're preempted from many things. I think that's important as we have constituents that may or may not read through this, and just like sections 1 and 2 give a nod to design review and parks and waterways. We've had some things handed to us that we can't control, and I think we should memorialize that as well. In less technical aspects, my experience with black powder coating is it fades in our high desert sun and looks chalky. I normally like black, but green might be better. I saw, and I'm sure my colleagues read in the materials that the green can be tough to match because it fades, and not all green is the same color green when it comes to powder coating. So black is, fine if we want to go that way as well. But I just note that almost anything that starts black in our sun looks chalky after a year or two, and maybe that's fine. A nice patina to it. If we're talking about types and preferences, my preference is to first have preference on existing infrastructure, and second to include lighting, and that gives the city some additional lighting, and that's a nice thing to have. So those are my thoughts, and I'll turn the time next to Councilmember Heller.
Thank you, President Page. Mr. Mayor, this has been a steep learning curve for me, going through this material more than once and getting a lot of assistance, as I said, from staff. The interest that struck me as a result of that was to encourage the broadest participation by staff in making those decisions that were raised this evening. I agree with President Page's observations about the equipment, but I also would entrust that to, as you put it, your tweaking of these specifics And I have great confidence in staff to resolve some of those issues with the cooperation of our industry provider. So I'd like to, I hope we're not delaying action on my behalf as a newcomer to the council. I'd be very comfortable with moving forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this matter, I candidly have the benefit of having sat through many work sessions. And one of the reasons the last time we met that I suggested that we continue it was to allow the newer members of the council to study it in depth and become comfortable and familiar with it. In my experience and observation, our staff has done an exhaustive research work, and I commend them for, as noted by Ms. Putt, the demands and requirements and the many entities that they've worked with. I think that they have a very strong understanding of the requirements and the limitations that are allowed regarding this resolution. Therefore, on this resolution, I would delegate my preferences to staff. And I am comfortable moving forward with the condition that it receives final review and approval by legal counsel.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobs?
I think I just like to thank.
Jacobs, I'm sorry.
Jacobs.
I added a syllable to your name. My apologies.
Having not sat on this in the past, I just like to thank industry and Jason, Crown Council, for indulging all my questions and allowing me to just kind of wrap my head around this and ask all those questions. I do concur with Councilmember Page on color. Just having experience in the lighting business, there is a standard green that's just a standard street light green. So in residential neighborhoods like where we live, they're all green, stick with that standard. Again, I defer to staff on that. And it may be one where you have black in some areas and green in others. But other than that, I really like the design. I think all the questions have been answered. I defer to staff as well, and don't see any reason why not to move this along sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Council, the matter before you is resolution 1022-22. The recommendation is to approve the resolution incorporating several recommendations that Council President Page and others have made regarding adding some language to acknowledge the preemption and the encouragement of the staff to look at the consistency in the neighborhood with the color of the poles. What's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve resolution 1122-22, incorporating the changes discussed in herein as recommendations as Director Thornborough and Legal Counsel Wadhams deem appropriate, and to grant them wide latitude in adjusting this resolution so that it comports with what's necessary to allow this technology into our city.
Second.
You've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. Jason and Kathy, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for your patience as we work through this. And we look forward to a profitable partnership. We'll move down to item G2, resolution 1123-22. resolution relating to surplus property, declaring property to be surplus. We go through this exercise so we can get rid of stuff, basically, that is of no value back to the city. So
Anti-hoarding resolution.
yes, yes. It's page 126 in the packet. If you have questions, I'll call staff up. If not, I'd entertain the pleasure of the council.
Mr. Mayor, I just had a quick question. Given the list, I'm assuming most of these are sold to other police departments?
Just a minute, I'll have the chief come up. Good question.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Jacobs, that's a great question. So what we do is the items that have a serviceable life and maybe don't fit the Garden City Police Department's technology anymore, we do either sell or give them away to other agencies that could use them. A lot of them are old, a lot of the items are old and they don't have much value. The items that are police specific that can't be sold, they're destroyed. And then the items that can be sent to auction for the public use, then we send them to auction.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Great, good question. Any other questions? Okay, pleasure, council.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would move to approve resolution 1123-22.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will clerk call roll?
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. Item G3, this is the second reading of ordinance 1025-22. That would be the second of 3 readings. So if the council so chooses, tonight we would read ordinance 1025-22 by title only.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we have the clerk read ordinance 1025-22 by title only for the second reading.
Second.
Thank you.
I was waiting for us.
Oh, thank you. Did you second?
Yes,
I
he
just
did.
did,
He did.
yeah. Second.
Okay. Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will clerk call roll?
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
Second reading of ordinance 1025-22, an ordinance of the city of Garden City, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending Garden City Code Title 8 Development Code, Chapter 4H Flood Hazard, Section 5 Provisions for Flood Hazard Reduction by amending the language to include updated standards for flood protection, providing severability, repealing conflicting city code provisions, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. We have no unfinished business, new business, and there's no need for an executive session this evening. We are waiting to hear from our from the Ada County Highway District representatives, and we have not heard. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.